Hey, what's up, everybody? In this video tutorial, this is the second part of putting together our Automata project. So if you haven't watched part one, please go back and watch part one. We're doing the top-down approach to modeling and loading in all of our parameters, and we were making, a box that was going to go out and basically follow all the parameters that we're setting, and we could change all this up on the fly, and it's going to be a smart part or a smart assembly. And then the last part of that, I was actually showing you how to create your shaft collars. All right, so we're going to go ahead and pick up where we left off from there. So if we take a look here at Google Classroom, you're going to see that there are some more parts that you're going to have to create. And one of those is going to be a crank handle. Another one's going to be a rod guide, and another one's going to be a follower. So we're going to go ahead and just take a look, and we're going to be referencing this crank handle for the next part of this. So jumping back into Fusion, let's go ahead and let's get started. All right. So as you saw last time with the shaft collar, we can kind of create this right here on the surface of this face. And the thing is, like, we can project geometry of our axle hole. Just don't forget that the axle hole was created with the axle hole DIA parameter, which means if we project geometry off of it, we're referencing geometry, and it's going to be able to change depending on whatever we set that parameter up. So it kind of just trickles down a little bit. It's a really cool feature. So let's get started. Let's go ahead and let's create a sketch right here on this face. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to come right in here and find that center point, and we can see that the diameter of this large lobe on the bottom of the crank handle is a diameter of 1. And now what I can do is come down and go to project. I'm just going to project this whole geometry through. All right, so we're going to reference that geometry. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is come down. I'm going to track off of this. I'm just going to create this circle here at the bottom, and it has a radius of 0.25, so that's going to be a diameter of 0.5. What I like to do is just to make sure we have a vertical constraint between this center point and this center point. And then, yeah, I think we're basically ready to now apply our last dimension here from center point to center point. And then this looks like it needs to be a distance of 1.5. Okay, so we have that. All right, so what I'm going to do is draw a line. I'm going to exaggerate this. I'm going to send this line way out beyond the actual circles themselves. And now I can use tangent, and I can pull these together just like so. It's going to behave very similar to basically what the pair cam did. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Just draw this out like so, exaggerate those. And now I can use tangent between this line and this circle, this line and this circle. Right, and we're almost done. Let's go ahead and do a little trim just to clean this up. Okay, and the last thing we have to do is draw a hole right here on this profile. So the thing is that we're going to be using the same material, the same round dowel that we're using with the axle. We're going to use it right here for our crank handle peg. So I'm just going to go ahead and just put that in. This is my axle hole DIA. Okay, and that's going to be at the center there. I'm going to accept it. And now I can finish up with that sketch, and I can look at this in a home view. All right, so we have all that set up. Now let's go ahead. Let's do a little extrusion here. So I want this to be part of it, this to be part of it, and this to be part of it. And then obviously I'm going to be bringing this out to be THK. All right, the thickness of our MDF. I'm sorry, not MDF. I put in the wrong one. Let's do that again. Let's do this, this, and this. We set this up last time. That is going to be PLYTHK. There we go. So that's going to be the thickness of our plywood. Just don't forget the most important part of this is making sure that that's a new component. And now we can go ahead and say OK. So we can easily drag this off. Okay, we can come in here, rename this component. So in this case, it's going to be our crank handle. All right, so that has been created. Now we obviously have to come in and put our information in here. So let's go to our crank handle. Let's right click. Let's come up here to our physical material. And now we should be seeing our finished plywood. We can drag it onto it. And then obviously we need to come over here, right click, go into our appearance, and let's find our maple. It's that 3D maple quilted. All right, it's the same plywood we use to cut out the shaft collar, so that totally makes sense. Okay, just to see if that actually works with that reference geometry, let's come here to modify. Let's go to change parameters, and I'm going to come here to let's go here, axle hole diameter, and let's just say that needs to be a 0.5. Let's accept that and say OK, and we can see that that has really jumped up enough on the bottom where it actually chopped it off. All right, so just showing you that that actually works. All right, on both the parameter here and the reference geometry. So in order to keep this from screwing things up, I'm going to come back into our axle hole diameter, put this back to 0.25, say OK. All right, and we are looking good. All right, so that's the crank handle peg. Okay, so now we're ready for the next part. We need to be creating the rod guides. They're going to be here. They're going to be inserted into these holes into the top panel. So jumping back out here into Google Classroom, if you take a look here, you're going to be seeing your rod guide working drawing right here. Let's just take a look at it. Just a couple notes. This is going to be made of ABS plastic, and then the appearance, it's the color of your choice. But you have all the information you need. Just note that one thing is that the thickness of the cylindrical part of this is going to match up with the thickness of our MDF panel, which is 0.1875. Okay, so let's just jump out here, go back into Fusion, let's get this figured out. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and create a sketch right here on top. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use project, and I'm going to capture this reference geometry right here. All right, I'm liking that. All right, so what we can do now is we can create a rectangle that's going to be a center rectangle. We're going to start it from the same center point. We're going to bring this out. Okay, so before I get going with this anymore, I don't know, maybe we want a parameter for the, for the follower rods. All right, we could totally set that up. All right, so I'm just going to apply, one distance for my follower rod. Let's go in here to modify. Let's go and change parameters. Let's add a new parameter, and we're just going to call this follower rod, just like so. All right, and right now the thickness, the width, and the height on this is going to be 0.25, and then we can extrude it to whatever distance we want, and we're just going to call this follower rod. Okay, so that has been added. That's a 1/4 inch. Let's say okay, and now let's go ahead. Let's add a dimension here. So I'm going to say this guy needs to be follower rod. Okay, so we have that. I like that, and let's go ahead now and let's pull this out, and this also needs to be follower rod. So we have that. All right, so they're worth 0.25. All right, they're right there where they need to be. Okay, now we can go ahead and we can finish up our sketch. Okay, so once we have that done, we can go ahead and do an extrusion here. It's just going to be this profile only. I'm going to send this in. So right now it's working as a join. So we're going to go ahead and just say we want this to be a new component. Okay, it's indicating that this is going down negative. All right, so if we want this to always match up with the actual thickness of the box, which we always do, what we should really do is just type in that this distance here needs to be worth our negative THK, which is the thickness of our MDF. Okay, so we can go ahead and say okay on that. All right, so the first thing we need to do is just to make sure that this guy is not going to be coming out, which it can right now. So what we can do is come up here to assembly. We can say we want an as-built joint. We can pick on this, pick on the top face. We can hit the play button to show that rigid. Okay, and we can say okay. All right, so obviously we need to give this a name. So this is going to be rod guide. All right, and if we looked at our actual drawing, we can see that this is made of ABS. So let's right-click on that, go up to physical material. Okay, and now we're going to come out here, go into our plastic. Okay, there's our ABS. We can go ahead and apply that to our part. Okay, but the ABS plastic right now is just sitting at white. I can change that to any color I want. All right, I'm going to come out here and do an edit, go into advanced. Okay, go into our appearance tab. Okay, and now we can come down to color. We can pick any color we want. I'm liking red, so I'm going to go ahead and say okay on that, hit the apply, and finally we can cancel out. All right, we can close out our physical material. So now we have that rod guide that's sitting in there. Okay, we're good to go. All right, so we're obviously going to need 2 rod guides. So let's just go ahead and right-click on this. Let's just do a copy, right-click in the white area, and let's do a paste. Okay, and now we can just slide this across, say okay on this, and now we can just go ahead with a manual joint. Okay, I am going to be making sure that this is a rigid joint, and I'm going to come right here to the top of this. Okay, I'm going to find that center point, and there it is. I'm going to take this right to the center point here. All right, and that jumps right in there. Okay, if we wanted to, we could always hit the play button to make sure it's right. We say okay, okay, and now we have our second rod joint in there, or rod guide. Okay, so if you're taking a look at this and you're like, well, we didn't really finish it up, yeah, you're right. All right, and we can see that, if we want to create a sketch on this, the bottom panel is going to be getting in the way. All right, so let's just go ahead. Let's just say we want to create a sketch on this face here. Okay, that panel is obviously in the way. Just don't forget, you always have the ability to come out here and turn that panel off, and now we're looking exactly what we need to be looking at. Okay, let's go ahead. Let's finish up with this. All right, so what we're going to do is let's go ahead and let's create a rectangle. Let's find a center rectangle. Okay, there's our center point. Let's pull this out. Okay, and we can see on our dimensions that this needs to be 0.34, okay, by 0.34. All right, so we have the rectangle that we're needing, the square that we're needing. We can go ahead and accept that. Finish up with our sketch. We can flip this over, okay, and now we can go ahead and do an extrusion here. Let's pull this out, and it looks like the distance we need to be pulling that out is going to be a distance of 0.25. Okay, so that's going to be our thickness on that. Okay, in this case, we're not going to be switching over to a new component because we're wanting to add to our existing base on that rod guide. So we're going to keep it at join. We're going to say OK. And since we updated here on the left-hand side, we can see that that has now been updated on the right-hand side. All right, so our rod guides are totally ready to go. Okay, so we have those done. All right, so that's it. That's how you create the rod guide. We've applied that ABS plastic, the color of our choice, and we are good to go. Okay, so now that we have our rod guides done, we're going to need our follow rods. These are the rods that are going to be sliding through the actual rod guides. So we can keep this pretty simple as well. All right, let's go ahead. Let's just create our sketch right here on top. We're going to pick right here on top of our rod guide. And what I'm going to do is come down, go to project, use project itself, and I'm just going to be picking the outside edges of this. We're going to reference that geometry because remember we set that up to be worth the parameter. All right, so we can change our rod guides and follow rods at the same time with that parameter. Let's just go ahead and say OK on that. And let's go ahead and finish up the sketch. Okay, so look at this in a home view. Okay, now we can come out here, do an extrusion of this profile. Okay, and I'm going to say that this needs to be a new component. We can't forget that. All right, and we're going to say that the distance on this right now is, let's just make it 4 inches. All right, that's going to be a nice distance for that. We can always change that up later, but let's go ahead and let's just say OK. All right, since we've created a new component, we got to give it a name. So this is going to be our follower rod. Okay, so we have follower rod, and we need to right click on this. Let's go up to physical material. Let's go down to our wood and let's see if we can't find something that our actual square dowels are made of, and that's probably going to be some sort of a pine. All right, it's pretty soft. So let's find pine here. Let's just drag that right on top of the follower rod, and let's go ahead and close out. All right, so we're all good to go there. All right, now the issue is that our follower rod, if we pull this out, we can see it's able to move. But we can't use an as-built joint here because it's going to lock it right onto that face. So instead, what we're going to do is come here to joint, go into our motion. We're going to turn this into a slider. Going back into the position tab, now I'm going to come here right to the bottom of this. Okay, I'm going to pick on that origin right there. I'm going to take this right here to the top, use my filter, and find that point right there. And now we can see that that is able to slide through that. So that looks great. Let's go ahead and say OK. All right, so we're not just going to need one follow rod in this case. We're also going to need a second one. So let's right-click on that. Let's go ahead and do a copy. Right-click out here in this white space. Let's do a paste. And then let's go ahead now and just slide this over. And now we can go ahead and find our joint origin. We're going to take that and drop that right onto that center joint origin here. And we can see in the preview that's still set on slider, so we're good to go. Let's go ahead and say OK on that. All right, so now we have our follower rods ready to go. All right, now we should probably be focusing on our actual followers themselves. All right, so jumping back over into Google Classroom, we can find the drawing for our followers. Just note that the followers we're going to be using in our virtual setting are going to be a little bit different than the followers I have 3D printed for you, but they're going to work absolutely the same. All right, so obviously we need to have a slot here, like a square hole that's going to be set up for, our square dowels, our follower rods, which is 0.25. And then we can see the other measurements we have for that. So I think what we're going to do is we're just going to create that actual sort of square insert portion of it first, and then we'll get started for the follower portion that's rounded at the bottom. We'll do that last. Okay, so back over into Fusion, let's go ahead and let's get started. Okay, let's go ahead and what can we use here? Yeah, we can use this. So let's go ahead, let's create a sketch. Okay, I'm going to go ahead right here to the top of our rod guide. Okay, and if we need to turn off follower rods, we can always do that. Okay, but let's go ahead and let's project. Okay, and let's get this. Let's reference this geometry again because we know that's the outside of the follower rod. Okay, let's go ahead and accept that. Okay, and then now looking at our actual drawing, we can see that this little cuff that's around the outside, it's 0.34 by 0.34. So let's go to create rectangle. Let's go into our center rectangle, find the dead center, pull this out, and then this needs to be 0.34 by 0.34. Okay, so we have that. Okay, now we can go ahead and finish the sketch. Okay, we can use extrude. We're only just going to be extruding this small portion up. This is no longer going to be a join. This is now going to be a new component. Okay, and then that distance that needs to come up is it's going to be worth the material thickness, so 0.1875. Okay, let's just go ahead and go with that. All right, so we have a new name for this. Obviously, this is going to be follower. Okay, so we have our new name. And taking a look at the drawing, we can see that our follower is going to be ABS once again, and it's a color of your choice. Okay, so let's right click on that. Let's go to physical material. Okay, and we have ABS, that's already out here. But I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this because what I want to do is I want to edit this, go into advanced, and now I can give this a different color just to break this up from the rod guide. So let's find a blue color on this one and say okay. And maybe while we're here, let's go ahead and rename this. So let's edit this and say this is going to be our blue ABS plastic. We can say done on that. And then this one, let's go ahead and let's just rename it. Let's go to edit, and we're going to say that this is our red ABS plastic. Okay, just so that there's no confusion. All right, so now I can go ahead and drag my blue ABS plastic on top of our follower. Okay, and now, since I haven't done anything with it, I can pull this over to the side. All right, so now we need to be making the bottom portion of this. So in order to do this, what I'm going to do is a symmetrical extrusion. So before I get to that, obviously I'm going to have to come out and create a mid-plane work plane. Okay, and I'm going to pick on one side of this. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and pick on the other. All right, so we have our mid-plane extrusion. Okay, just like so. Now we can go ahead and create a sketch right here. All right, so when we take a look at this, we can see we have an arc at the bottom that has a radius of 0.5. So I'm just going to go ahead off the center point here, and I'm going to go ahead and just draw this center point up here. That obviously needs to be a radius of 0.5, so that's a diameter of 1. And then I can also see that my dimension, well, let's go ahead, let's just lock this in vertically from here to the origin. And then let's go ahead and add a dimension from the center point. Looks like to this edge here, that needs to be a distance of 0.387. Nope, I got that wrong. Let's do that again. I'm looking at it the wrong way. So dimension from here to here we go, of 0.387. All right, now we're good. All right, so once we have that, we can go ahead, we can track this over. Okay, find that intersection and then send this across to the next intersection. And now we can go ahead and do a trim. All right, so we have what we're looking for here. Let's go ahead and finish up with that sketch. Okay, let's go ahead now and do an extrusion. Okay, but we're going to pull this out. We can see it's only going to go one way. So we're going to flip this over to symmetrical, but we need to go with whole length on this. And then the whole length that I provided to you is a whole length of 0.5. Okay, so once again, that's going to be joined because we want that to go in with that cuff that we've already created. All right, and there we go. We have our follower. All right, so we can go ahead and start turning some things back on here. All right, so we have our follower rods we need to turn on. Okay, we never did turn back on our box bottom. Okay, we have our follower here. Okay, so here's what we need to be working on next. Is we need to actually attach our followers to the bottoms, okay, of our actual follower rods. Okay, so let's go ahead, let's do a joint on this. And we're going to come right here to the bottom of that square hole. And we're going to take this right up here to the center point here. Okay, now obviously this is going to be in the wrong location. And the other thing is it's the wrong motion. So this does need to be a rigid. Okay, I'm going to go back to position, but it looks like I need to be turning this to 90 degrees and get it where I'm wanting it. Okay, and now let's go ahead and say okay. All right, so we can see that our follower now is attached to the follower rod. Since we need a second follower rod, let's go ahead, or follower, let's right click on that, do a copy, And now let's go ahead and do a paste out here in the white space. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and send this over, say OK. Now we can come up and use our joint. Okay, making sure that this is going to be a rigid joint. And now let's go to the bottom of that hole, find that center point origin, and now take it to the center of the follower rod. Now let's go ahead and say OK on that. Okay, there's that rigid joint now. Okay, so there we go. We got follower rods, we have followers, rod guide, shaft collars, and we have our crank handle. Okay, so on the third portion of this, you're going to start seeing how we're going to be putting all this together. Okay, we still have to build our axle and start building our sub-assemblies so we can start putting in our cams. So there you go. That's your video tutorial on the second part of our Automata project. Good luck.